Hey, this is Philip Mandelbaum, interviewing someone pretty special today with Customer Engagement Insider. His name is David Green, and he's the director of civil liberties for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, commonly known as EFF. And I asked David to join me today because something pretty wild happened yesterday that everyone on Twitter seems to be freaking out about. And I would like to maybe add some knowledge to the discussion, some experience to the discussion, and kind of find out if we should be freaking out or if we shouldn't. How is Elon Musk buying Twitter going to impact the general population, going to impact civil liberties? And how is it going to impact someone who uses Twitter to promote products or a brand or a personality? Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to help try and sort these things out.
Great. So let's start with to me, not exactly the focus of Customer Engagement Insider, but civil liberties. We have no business if we aren't able to express ourselves freely and without fear, I guess, right? So even businesses are impacted by that. How do you think, well, actually tell me, what have EFF's fears been even leading up to this takeover, so to speak, and how maybe have they changed, if at all, since Elon Musk taking over?
Yeah, so let me talk about not so much just around Twitter in particular, but how EFF, what our policy positions are and how we work in this space that's sort of generally called, content moderation, how these social media platforms and other online services treat user speech as it passes through them, and as they engage with it, right? Because they all do something. They all either decide to highlight some things, or they have tools that allow identify what they think their users want to see, and that's why most people sign up for these services, because they offer these types of features that help them find stuff they think they want.
Of course, we're not always right.
Yeah, well, right. And a lot of times we laugh at how wrong they are, right? I didn't want to join that group. What were they thinking? That's ridiculous. Right. Their algorithm's awful. So, but there are human rights concerns to this, obviously, because first of all, these things are global products, even if they really didn't want to be, they largely are. And there are human rights concerns because in some places, around the world, and not even just in non-democratic societies, but both in democratic and non-democratic societies, some of these platforms run by private people can really be either the most effective place for someone to speak, or sometimes the only place they can really speak. The ability to speak pseudonymously, which many, although not all, of these services offer, is really crucial for many people who don't have the privilege or luxury to be able to put their real name with their words. That's really critically important for political dissidents in, again, non-democratic societies. Even people who are just within their own small community cannot be open about their views. And so when a platform chooses to engage with the user speech and maybe does it in a way that makes themselves less visible, or removes it, or doesn't allow them to use the service, that can have human rights concerns. At the same time, there can also be human rights concerns with the complete free-for-all use of these services, because as we've seen, and again, this is not unique to social media at all, but they can be used for personally directed abuse, for harassment, to undermine democratic institutions. And so again, we get human rights concerns just floating around on this issue of content moderation. So EFF's position has been, first of all, I think, to realize first that this content moderation has, first of all, it's everyone does it. Everybody moderates, even the services that say we are completely pro-free speech, they all moderate. I think 8kun has some very minimal moderation, which is sort of always held up as the thing that doesn't moderate at all, and thus all the awful stuff goes there. But even that has some minimal moderation. So everyone does it, and pretty much everyone always has. I think sometimes you hear these stories about this golden age when, it was and that really has never been the case. I think to the extent someone had the experience where they thought speech wasn't moderated, it really was just because they were fortunate enough to not be seeking out or speaking as an unpopular speaker. So I think if you especially talk to people who are sexual freedom advocates, or their work is their legal speech has always been moderated from the internet. Anyway, this is a long way of just saying that what our EFS position is with respect to content moderation is to understand that everyone's going to do it, not to tell them not to do it. In fact, in some cases, we think it's appropriate. I think it's completely understandable that users may want a forum that's either moderated like by subject matter, like I just want to have a social media service that's devoted, to kayaking. And I don't want them to have to I want them to be able to remove speech that doesn't pertain to kayaking. Or even, I want to have a social media service, an entity, right, where I can just talk to people who share my political views. And so I'm okay if they kick out the people who don't share my political views, right? I don't want that to be the only thing that exists on the internet, but I'm okay with that existing. And then also really to protect users who feel like they're being subject to abuse, harassment, and silence in that way, or they feel like they can't use the service because they get attacked on it. So so what we have done is to really urge companies, first of all, recognize, at least certainly under US law, they have a legal right to moderate. They have legal right to edit and curate their sites. That's pretty well established under the First Amendment. But then actually to urge them do so within a way that's consistent with human rights principles. And so we're one of the organizations that has drafted and endorsed the Santa Clara Principles, which is now in its second version, which is just sort of a framework for how you think about content moderation in a human rights respective way that really asks and urges sites to have clear rules and understandable rules and to enforce them consistently, to notify users if there's a negative treatment on either their accounts or their speech, to give them an opportunity to appeal, to be culturally competent in the decisions they make. So have the language competence they need, and again, be able to reach out to experts when they don't have in-house expertise for this stuff. So that's the approach that we've taken.
And it's interesting because, well, first of all, I think that's really critically important. Someone like, an average user isn't going to be able to tell if they're doing it that way, right? Because I have been in experiences, or there have been times when I've seen really rabid hate speech, and then I go to the account and they have one follower, but every single tweet is horrific, things I wouldn't even repeat. I report them. Twitter says they haven't broken our policies.
Yeah.
Okay. Any thoughts on that? Just curious.
Well, I think everybody has an experience where they find that they are bewildered by why a platform, Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or Pinterest or whatever, right? Why they made a decision, they think that what wasn't consistent with what their community standards are. So everyone has that experience. I don't apologize for the services doing this, but these mistakes and those they're really inevitable, and it's impossible to eliminate them. And
it's part of the problem because it's not human beings doing it, or is it human beings doing it?
Well, the main problem is just the scale. Even the smallest sites, the scale of decision making is massive. And because there's a lot of decisions, there's going to be a lot of mistakes.
Yeah,
I think that's unavoidable. And I do think that to the extent that they try and deal with the scale issue by automating their decision making, then the automated tools, as far as we can tell, have really very limited utility in making these highly contextualized decisions. Now, maybe that will change in the future. Maybe those tools can get better. They're good at some things, but they're not good at other things. And there's just not enough person power available to put a human on every one of these decisions.
Yeah. And I would say Twitter's, for instance, this is the subject for today, is so big that it's one of those companies where I don't expect good customer service. But outside of something like, in most cases, not only do we expect it as consumers, but we're going to make decisions to not support a company if it's bad. Many consumers, one bad experience is all it takes. And automation can be such a great thing. I just wrote an article about all the ways automation can help in marketing and customer experience. But there's been so many instances of companies using automation and having it go terribly sideways because they didn't incorporate automation into an overarching strategy that does involve humans and does want to actually kind of control the automation to do the right thing. Like if you just let it run, it's likely to not follow what a human would do.
Yeah, I think there's been lots of studies also just about bias in
totally.
automated decision making, really problematic. And again, you're if you put in discriminatory data if it's a discriminatory data set, which you have to really actually make an effort to avoid having.
Exactly.
You're going to get discriminatory decision making, even if that wasn't anybody's intention. And so there's a lot of issues with it. At the same time, there probably has to be some role for it, just because, again, the scale is massive. It's just, what is that role? We hope it's not the ultimate decision-making role, or at least we hope if it is, that they have confidence that the systems work. And as far as we can tell, again, this is not specific to any one service, but there seems that a lot of these automated decision-making systems get rolled out without that confidence.
And I've seen, I guess I'll put it this way. I've seen instances where someone has had their account hacked and needed the help of EFF and Access Now to get it back. I've seen instances of people on both sides of the so-called political aisle being removed. And then I've seen, like I mentioned, hate speech being ignored completely. It's kind of a weird lead into this question, but there is a difference between freedom of speech and allowance of hate speech. And where do you think Twitter and other social media platforms should draw the line between allowing people to express themselves, and then where is that line where you've now crossed it and you don't have that freedom anymore because of what you're saying?
Well, I think there's two different issues, right? And this answer will actually change depending on what global legal system you are subject to, but certainly under US law, and every legal system has a distinction between legal speech and unlawful speech, right? So one distinction a platform can make would be to say all legal speech can go on the platform, but all illegal speech we're going to remove. And they even might, in most places, will have might have a legal obligation actually to remove it, or at least remove it once they know about it. So that's one thing. But there's also a lot of speech that people don't like that's perfectly legal, where the platforms aren't going to have any legal obligation to remove it, but they might choose to remove it. And I'm really in favor of platforms actually just developing their own policies around this about what they want and what they don't want. I think, to me personally, as a user, I prefer a service that doesn't have hateful speech on, because I don't like to interact with that. At the same time, there are some situations where it can be hard to distinguish hateful speech from non-hateful speech. A lot of times counter speech to someone's hateful speech gets labeled as hateful speech because it refers to the same language, right? And we see a lot of what we would seem to us to be mistaken takedown of materials that are really just refuting somebody else's hateful speech.
Well, that's
So,
really
so, so it's
backwards.
it's so even if you would choose to have a no hate speech policy, it can be difficult to even the best intentioned person. It can be difficult. It can be difficult to enforce. But so I don't. Again, my personal preference for sites I use, I prefer not to be one where I have to deal with and be exposed to that
Right.
speech. But again, I do think it's up to platforms to have their own policies around this. I think what we've found is that almost every platform that exists, at least their stated policy, is to remove hate speech, even though they have no legal obligation under US law
Okay.
to do
Oh,
so.
that's a
So
good
even, I
thing.
mean, pick the ones that fly the big free speech flag, like, Getter or something like that, doesn't allow hate. Their terms of service are community standards that are no hateful speech.
Right. And I guess in a Getter instance, the hate speech would be a leftist coming on and saying something, right? Because
Yeah, and I don't have their community standards right in front of me, but I
yeah,
think they specifically exclude Antifa.
right. Oh,
And they're very concerned about anti-religious speech, which
uh,
I don't, to me, is not a particularly left or right issue, but to the extent that, but I could see that's their specific concern, which
right.
some people interpret as being, at least they're coming at it from sort of a U.S. right perspective, U.S. political right perspective.
Right. Yeah, that's what I figured. So it's totally up to the people, like you said, running the platform, what is considered hate speech and not, outside of the legal stuff that you mentioned. So that leads me to the next kind of series of short questions, which is now with someone at the helm who you know, some people just admire greatly because of his success, but others look at where his success began, from his parents' money in South Africa. I think more relevant is probably things like firing employees for posting videos of Tesla's malfunctioning, union busting. So there are a lot of people in business, entrepreneurs who are very excited. What kind of new money-making options might there be on Twitter? But then there are a lot of people who are afraid because of who it is that maybe they in particular might fall under hate speech in a way they never did before. I know you don't like to project or guess. Can you tell me anything, maybe even summarize what you've seen? What are people saying about this that, the general public or business owners should know?
Well, I think it's true that we don't. Anybody who says they know what he's going to do and how it's going to change Twitter, if it changes at all, really is just guessing. So if nothing happened at all, that would be completely not surprising, because there's lots of people about bluster about things before they buy companies, and then once they get in and realize how it works, they realize that they can't. There's nothing. Maybe it's set up the best, but it could be. He could also make completely radical changes, and I have no idea what's going to happen. So I think I think what people should look at is, do the actual stated terms of service change? Is that going to affect the way that businesses can use the site? How sites deal with advertising, for example, is, that you could just completely change that, right? That's something that present is not very highly regulated, at least in the US. And same thing with to the extent that there's an e-commerce application, right? I mean, those are types of things that could completely be changed. It's not something he's talked a lot about, but I don't think we can hold him to just to the few things it's hard to say when he says he wants it to be a free platform. It's hard to know what that means. If that just means he thinks that there should be less content moderation, or whether he just thinks it should be different. I mean, and if he's not someone who in his past has shown a general respect for freedom of speech when people want to criticize him or his companies, certainly, or even really freedom of speech as it's typically framed in a human rights framing, where we have a great concern for people who are who are denied opportunities to speak, who are not in power, who rely on freedom of speech as some way of their only way of being able to participate in society, and to look at freedom of speech as just the freedom of speech of the powerful is a very, very cramped view of the freedom.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say how this is going to be in there, but certainly, there's a potential for there's a potential that nothing could happen, but also potential for great changes that would completely change the way people engage with the platform. And I think for businesses, again, advertising might completely change. Also, the people who are on it, the audience that's on it, might completely change. I keep hearing stories of people saying, "Oh, people are abandoning Twitter," and so does it not be? So there's at least a possibility, right? Of course, I don't know if that's true or not.
Well,
I haven't lost a ton of followers, but I don't have a ton.
Well, I lost about 150 from my second account, not associated with Customer Engagement Insider. And I heard from others they've lost thousands. The DMs are wild right now. People talking about switching to Mastodon. That's one. And there's another one. I'm forgetting the name. It's something social. It's Counter Social. Counter Social is the other one that I'm seeing a lot of people move to, but I'm sure, and these same people, what they're saying are twofold. Just the general fear of the people who had been kicked off coming back. And those people that had been kicked off were the ones involved in disinformation related to the election, for instance. Donald Trump being an example of an account that was eventually removed. And to be honest, I'm not on one side or the other when it comes to freedom of speech. Like, I'm not certain that these people should have been removed in the first place. But the reason I bring it up is because a lot of people are certain they should have been removed. And to your point, tons of people are leaving. So, but also to your point, tons of people are going to either come now for the first time or come back from wherever they went in the interim period. So that is going to have a huge impact for advertisers if their entire potential audience is completely different. They're going to have to rethink A, like what they're advertising, B, how they're advertising, and C, if their audience isn't there anymore, should they be advertising at all? Another thing I've noticed in the conversation since this news broke is people making a joke that the first change that's going to happen is he's going to remove ad blockers because he's a businessman. And a lot of people are very happy about their ad blockers. And it's not just on Twitter. Businesses have to be really strategic and, in order to reach audiences now because of things like ad blockers. And I'll just mention that the ads on Twitter, at least predominantly, the ones that I see, are examples of native advertising because they look like a regular tweet. They are in the stream of regular tweets, and then they just have a little note at the bottom that this is a paid ad. And to me, that's a good type of advertising because what's on the other end, at least ostensibly, is not just a sales mechanism. It's supposed to be a story. That's what content marketing is. It's supposed to be something that people are excited to read about, irrespective of the brand. So my question for you is just really, what are your thoughts actually in general on native advertising on a Twitter platform where people are scrolling and I think probably very often missing the fact that it's an ad?
Yeah, so I have to confess that I actually don't have a lot of experience viewing ads on Twitter because I don't use it on my phone, and that tends to be right. where most of the ad service is done. And but I think my concern with native ad, I think that for consumer protection, that it's something that is an advertisement or even something that is just paid content should be apparent to consumers. So to the extent that native advertising is causing consumer confusion, then I'd be concerned about that. If something is clearly labeled an advertisement and it's and it's author, and we know where it's coming from, and you know that the author has a financial interest in it, that to address the consumer confusion and anything that might be misleading or deceptive about it, then I'm okay with it.
Okay. Yeah, and I think Twitter does do a decent job. It's how they designed it, and they do a decent job in terms of making it clear.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought the language of sponsored was was a little bit of an understatement, but I do think that people using the service, my understanding is that they have at least have some idea of what that means.
Yeah, and I'll just say, for what it's worth, from my time creating the content marketing division at the Associated Press, these conversations are like weeks long, like over one little word. Like, should we use sponsored? Should we change the color? Because everyone's very uptight about, and rightfully so, like, how do we offer this without turning a lot of people off? And I think they probably did the best they can and still turned a lot of people off. In my experience, I haven't found Twitter to be the most effective from promoting a business or brand or idea that through paid sources. I think Twitter can be really good organically, but I've had much better success with LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram when it comes to paid. In any case,
I think that's again, this is your area, right? At least my experiences from being on Twitter occasionally is that while the advertising, I think, is sort of easy to skip over, or adjust your settings so you don't see it that much. But brand engagement, it's a great pace for brands to just engage and to have personalities, and to be a little snarky and things like that. And I that seems to build goodwill among people. And it will be, I think one of the things that'll be interesting to watch would be if Twitter really does take a turn where it becomes a site that just has a lot of stuff people don't want, or where it really feels like it's the only people still on it, or people with sort of beyond the pale offensive ideas, or at least with a certain set that how much of an associational cost there will be to a brand that keeps a brand presence on it if they're figured to be they're just associating with the people who didn't leave Twitter. Now, again, I have no idea whether Twitter will become that, but I think it's an interesting thing to look for, whether there will become a certain negative toxicity to remaining and from a business sense, to continue to engage on it in that way.
Yeah, really great point. And we really don't know yet. I can't see that happening. It's so big. But it's a really great point. I mean, like, if you're advertising on Getter or like 4chan or something, you know exactly who your audience is. Right now on Twitter, there's tons of audiences and you have to filter to find the right one. And if that audience goes away, why are you there anymore? So, I've kept you for a long time. I imagine that you are being requested a lot right now. So let me just conclude with, in addition to your advice to just keep an eye on the terms and conditions, just parting advice for a regular old guy or gal or neither, who wants to be on social media and Twitter. What would you advise that kind of person to do? And then lastly, obviously, where my focal areas are. What would you advise a Twitter employee? What would you advise a business advertising on Twitter, or using Twitter like Wendy's for that snark factor?
Yeah, I think it's really for everybody. It's really just to pay attention to what happens. I really think everyone should at least pay attention if there are going to be changes in editorial policy, to pay attention to that and just make a decision whether that's whether if the change makes the service either more attractive or less attractive, or you just would use it in a different way. So I think that's my general advice. I would also tell consumers to pay attention. I mean, Musk said some things that about authenticating humans, which we're not sure what that means. But one of the things that could be a big change would be sort of the loss of the ability to be truly anonymous or pseudonymous on Twitter. So if you're a person who uses it and again doesn't have the privilege of using it under your known identity, then you should pay attention to whether their policy of Twitter's been really good. Historically, has been good about fighting to protect user privacy. So when they get legal requests to disclose user information, they've been really good about fighting those. Whether it'd be important to see whether that changes, that might change how certain users, whether they use the site at all. So I think it's going to be important to look for things like that. I mean, I think one of the things we're looking for is for the new ownership or new management, if it has it, to reaffirm its commitment to the Santa Clara principles. So I guess everyone can keep a lookout for that as well.
Yeah. Okay. So it's really wait and see right now. I think that makes sense. That's what my advice would be as well. If you're part of the group that jump ship, then everyone's going to jump ship. If everyone says chill, then we can wait and see. So I'm hoping
there might be good reasons to jump ship. You
just don't know yet. So
yeah.
So wait and see and keep your eyes open, right?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate your time. Sure. I really appreciate everything you guys do. If you're interested in this kind of important work, protecting our freedoms and liberties, protecting our privacy and things like that while we exist on an increasingly online world, we enter the metaverse. These things are going to become increasingly more important for ourselves and increasingly more important for businesses to understand, because they're looking for that customer information, and what we as businesses can access is changing every day. Thanks again. I really appreciate it. And good luck keeping an eye on all of this.
Oh, thanks.
All right.
Good luck. Let me know how this comes out or what form it ends up in.
Yes, so. I will shoot it over to you.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thanks,
have a great day. Good luck. Bye.